Hi, welcome to this video. My name is Nathan Mars, and today I'll be giving a short introduction into Redux, an awesome JavaScript library that helps manage state in React applications. Let's jump into the agenda. First, I will review state in React. Next, I'll provide a brief introduction into what Redux is. I'll then provide Redux use cases, including when you should and shouldn't use Redux. I'll conclude with providing learning resources to help you get started in implementing Redux into your React applications. Let's dive into a review of state in React. State is used for mutable data or data that will change. So state is used so that a component can keep track of information in between any renders that it does. When you set state, it updates a state object and then re-renders the component. This is super cool because that means React takes care of the hard work and is blazingly fast. State is particularly useful for user input. Let's look at this Google search bar, for example. Let's suppose that this search input is a React component. In order to keep track of the new input a user is putting in, we need some form of state, as a search bar input is bound to change a lot. So, example state we could have for this is a term key value pair in the state object. What this looks like in code is as follows. We have here a search bar React component. Here in the constructor, we are setting a state. This is a stateful component since we have state in it. And all state is a JavaScript object. Well, in this case, we only have one key value pair of term. In the render method, we're returning an input that has a value that we initially supply with whatever this .state.term is. At the beginning, it's going to be null, an empty string. We then also have an on-change handler that takes any time this input has new input inputted into it. How many times can I say input? Basically what will happen is it'll take that input to this function on input change, pass in the term, and then call this.setState term. What this will do first is go to this object and update term key value pair with whatever was passed in here. Then it will re-render this component and show us the new state.term value. This is super handy, as now we have a component that we have a means of keeping track of data in between renders. Next, we're going to talk about limitations of state in React. First, requirements for JavaScript single-page applications have become increasingly complicated. State can include server responses and cached data, as well as locally created data that has not yet been persisted to the server. User interface state is also increasing in complexity, as we need to manage active routes, selected tabs, spinners, pagination controls, and so on. In summary, code must manage more state than ever before. Next, managing this ever-changing state is hard. For example, a more complicated system could have a model that can update another model, then a view can update a model, which updates another model, and this in turn might cause another view to update. When a system is opaque and non-deterministic, it's hard to reproduce bugs or add new features. At some point, you no longer understand what happens in your app, as you have lost control over the when, why, and how of its state. Lastly, this complexity is difficult to handle as we're mixing two concepts that are very hard for the human mind to reason about: mutation and asynchronicity. I call them Mentos and Coke. Both can be great in separation, but together they create a mess, as we see with this guy's experiment. But what if I were to tell you that state doesn't have to be this way? that there's a small JavaScript library built that addresses all of the limitations of vanilla React state. Would you believe me? Are you excited to learn about this mysterious JavaScript library? Of course, I'm talking about Redux, the predictable state container for JavaScript apps. So, what is Redux? Redux attempts to make the state mutations predictable. Redux can be defined in three fundamental principles. Principle 1. Single source of truth. The state of your whole application is stored in an object tree within a single store. This makes it easy to create universal apps, as the state from your server can be serialized and hydrated into the client with no extra coding effort. A single state tree also makes it easier to debug or inspect an application. It also enables you to persist your app's state in development for a faster development cycle. Some functionality, which has been traditionally difficult to implement, undo and redo, for example, can suddenly become trivial to implement if all of your state is stored in a single tree. Moving on to principle 2, state is read-only. The only way to change a state is to emit an action, an object describing what happened. This ensures that neither the views nor the network callbacks will ever write directly to the state. Instead, they express an intent to transform the state. Because all changes are centralized and happen one by one in a strict order, there are no subtle race conditions to watch out for. As actions are just plain objects, they can be logged, serialized, stored, and later replayed for debugging or testing purposes. And lastly, moving on to principle 3, changes are made with pure functions. To specify how the state tree is transformed by actions, you write pure reducers. Reducers are just pure functions that take the previous state and an action and return the next state. Remember, to return new state objects, instead of mutating the previous state, you can start with a single reducer, and as your app grows, split it off into smaller reducers that manage specific parts of the state tree. Because reducers are just functions, you can control the order in which they are called, pass additional data, or even make reusable reducers for common tasks, such as pagination. Now on to use cases of Redux. Redux is framework agnostic, meaning you can use it with Vue.js, Angular, and most other front-end JavaScript frameworks. In general, you want to use Redux when you have reasonable amounts of data changing over time, you need a single source of truth, or you find that approaches like keeping everything in a top-level React component state are no longer sufficient. However, it's also important to understand that using Redux comes with trade-offs. It's not designed to be the shortest or fastest way to write code. It's intended to help answer the question, when did a certain slice of the state change? And where does the data come from, with predictable behavior? It does so by asking you to follow specific constraints in your application. Store your application state as plain data, describe changes as plain objects, and handle those changes with pure functions that apply updates immutably. This is often the source of complaints about boilerplate code. These constraints require effort on the part of a developer, but also open up a number of additional possibilities, such as store persistence and synchronization. In the end, Redux is just a tool. It's a great tool, and there are some great reasons to use it, but there are also reasons you might not want to use it. Make informed decisions about your tools and understand the trade-offs involved in each decision. We will conclude the presentation on Redux by providing some learning resources for Redux. The following are some great free learning resources for getting started with Redux. Links to these resources will be in the description below. First off, we have Redux documentation. Redux has some great documentation. You should go check it out. Oftentimes, one of the best resources for learning a JavaScript library such as this is to check out their documentation. Second, we have a simple Redux tutorial. I scoured the web to find the simplest Redux tutorial I could find. By going through this tutorial, you will create a simple React app that implements Redux. Finally, there's a tutorial by the creator of Redux. In this comprehensive 2-hour tutorial, Dan Abramov, the creator of Redux, will teach you how to manage state in your React application with Redux. Congratulations! You've made it through this brief introduction to Redux. I hope that you've gotten something meaningful out of this video. To reward you for making it all the way through, please enjoy this short clip of a teacup pig.